with this new European Union directive, and a number of leading Israeli officials have called it an earthquake. What it states is that in any future agreements between Israel and the European Union, there needs to be an exclusion clause referring to settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Now, I'm standing in the Israeli settlement of Ariel. Behind me is the university that was founded 31 years ago and which today has a student population of 14,000. Degrees that are awarded here are recognized by the Israeli Higher Council for Education. But this latest move by the European Union is bad news not only for settlements like this one, but also for universities like the one you see behind me. What it states is that there needs to be a prohibition on all grants, scholarships, prizes and money that is awarded unless there is this exclusion clause. Now, it is estimated that this will affect some 40% of Israeli institutions, including large corporations and banks that have indirect ties with the settlements. Palestinians and their allies have congratulated and welcomed this move, saying that it is an important political and cultural boycott on the settlement movement. But the Israelis are angry, particularly the right-wing elements in Netanyahu's government, who say that they're now going to step up their cause to end any kind of gestures for a resumption of peace talks with the Palestinians. Paula Slier, RT, in the Ariel settlement, West Bank.
Well, for further discussion on this, we're now joined live by Professor of International Law, John Degard. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here on RT to discuss this. Well, it's almost taken a century after the territories were occupied for Europe to spring to action. Why now?
Well, I think until fairly recently it has been accepted that Israel's borders were the borders of 1967, but in recent times, Israel has started to contest that, and that's very clear in the response of Mr. Netanyahu to these European Union guidelines, because he has stated that we do not accept any external dictates on our borders. And that is the reason why I think the EU has made this declaration now. I think the other reason is the advent of institutions like the University of Ariel, because as you rightly pointed out, this is going to be the institution that will be mainly affected, because it does mean that research grants and prizes that might otherwise have gone to the University of Ariel will not be permitted.
Well, in light of these developments, are we likely to see confrontation between Israel and the EU on this issue? How do you think the situation will develop there?
I don't think that Israel can afford to confront the EU, because it is very dependent on the EU, both economically and politically. But I do think it puts the Israeli government in a very awkward position, because it has to declare on honor that the entity in question is not within the West Bank, East Jerusalem or Gaza. And that will be very difficult for Israel. It's much easier when it comes to labeling settlement goods to lie and say that settlement goods do not come from a settlement. Now, it will be necessary for the Israeli government to declare on honor in terms of the guidelines that the entity is not a settlement.
Okay, do you think that being in this awkward situation, as you have described it, Israel will be sort of forced to soften its stance on expansion?
I don't think it can afford to do that, because politically the Israeli cabinet is divided on the issue, or at least it does seem to be moving in the direction of de facto annexation of the West Bank. So I think it's a very difficult situation for Israel to declare now, at the time that John Kerry is attempting to restart settlement talks, that it is confined to its 1967 borders. And that's the crunch, really.
Okay, Netanyahu said that the new rules violate existing agreements. So does that mean that we're likely to see some sort of clash here between the EU and Israel on this issue?
My understanding of the EU agreements is that they have never recognized Israel's sovereignty over any areas in the West Bank or East Jerusalem or Gaza. So I do not accept that there will be a violation of existing agreements.
Okay, that was John Dugard, Professor of International Law. Thanks so much, sir, for sharing your views with us here on RT. And Crosstalk is up next.